Thank you, everybody, for being here. And actually, this is my first time in Africa, so whew, it feels like a homecoming, truly. So my name is Ian Gaines. I'm an advisor for Bitcoin Policy Institute, and we're a think tank that essentially orange pills lawmakers in DC. We are the only Bitcoin-focused advocacy group that's educating policymakers in Capitol Hill. So thinking about yesterday when Ray Youssef said, if you're not at the table, you're on the table, that's one of the fundamental sort of drivers that's driving us at BPI. And that's why I'm so honored to have Magatte Wade here, who is in Africa, sort of giving economic empowerment, and then also being able to create infrastructures from a regulatory and legislative side to bring flourishment in Africa. So I absolutely appreciate you being here. So let's start. So first, could you give an introduction to the audience, who you are, and then a little bit about your life's work?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I've seen many of you yesterday. So again, my name is Magatte Wade. I'm originally from Senegal. So on a quick nutshell, I started out as an entrepreneur back in, when was it? 2003. And back then I was building my first company, which was a consumer packaged good business, so consumer brand. And what all my companies have in common, I'm right now building my third one, what they all have in common is basically that they have embedded in their DNA the very best of my Senegalese culture. And so when I started my first business, it was a beverage company. I think back in the days, it was the first African brand started by an African in America, which was, as prominent as it was. We raised, $32-something million of financing. At some point, put back to work some 9,000 women back home in Senegal. And that's pretty much been my recipe since then, just going after one item to the next. And so I was definitely part of the early, Afro-optimist before it became cool to be an Afro-optimist. And I'm very happy to see how far we've come. But along the journey of starting those businesses, which always have in common the fact that there's a sister company in the West and a sister company back home in Senegal, I have come to connect some interesting dots, and so which led me to what I'm doing today, in addition to being an entrepreneur, which is working on the legal framework that is offered to entrepreneurs in Africa. And I'm sure we'll go more in details about that. So I'll just leave my introduction to that for now.
Great. So I guess to anchor this conversation, we can think about this as a roadmap, right? With economic empowerment and prosperity in Africa as the destination. I would like to get into what are the challenges that sort of face us, that's in our way, and really get into what you're doing. What's your roadmap to getting to that place of economic prosperity? So I guess to start with the destination and work our way back, what does prosperity mean to you, and what does that look like in Africa?
Yeah, so let me answer that maybe in a different order. I am here because I 100% celebrate, what everybody in the Bitcoin community has been doing to liberate, people, Africans in this case, from all the inflation that's been caused by fiat currency, as well as the arbitrary controls that come from the government. So I want to start with that premise that I am that's why I'm here. I've always been a big-time supporter of Bitcoin. For me, it is Bitcoin for probably, reasons that all of you buy into. That being said, I think it's important for me to try and remind everybody of what the ultimate goal is. Are we doing Bitcoin for the sake of Bitcoin, or even for the sake of freedom? What do we mean, right? So for me, the ultimate goal needs to be about Africa and Africans becoming co-creators of global prosperity and innovation in the world. I want us to be truly beyond this whole Wakanda thing. Wakanda sounds great, it looks great, but let us not forget that the goal at the end of the day is for us to become respected co-creators of, global co-creators of innovation and prosperity. How do we get there? How do we get there, and what's the role of Bitcoin in it? How do we get there has to do with definitely having access to greater economic freedom, right? Let me give you some examples. It doesn't matter how much Bitcoin, having access to Bitcoin is not going to change how much it costs for me to start a business in many African nations. In many African nations, it is still too expensive to run and start a business. And that it doesn't necessarily have to do with do you have access to Bitcoin or not. It has to do with regulations that actually make it so costly to have to do business. And we do know that high cost of doing business, no good for entrepreneurship. If you want as much entrepreneurship as you can, high cost of doing business is probably not a good idea. And simply having access to Bitcoin or not doesn't necessarily change that. Does it help with how you do business? Yes, but does that rule and regulations change? No. Also, there is very little labor flexibility in many African nations. In my case right now, I'm trying to hire 2 more employees. Do you know that after I sign my contract with you, Ian, we have to go to l'Inspection du Travail, the labor inspection office, government office, and there, this inspector, who has never come to my company, doesn't know what the heck it is that we're doing or how we're doing it, gets to decide if you, Ian, can work with me or not. And they ask you to provide them with your health certificate, because they, the government, get to decide if you're physically apt to do the work that you, as a grown-up man, decided to do with me. How exactly having access to Bitcoin or not does change that, right? So, but the more you make the rules to be this way, the harder it is for entrepreneurs to enterprise, and the wealth you're supposed to create simply is not there. Another one has to do with tariffs. Tariffs being so high, 75% tariff on some of my products for what I manufacture in Senegal. So I want us to also remember that part of the equation. Because if we're going to become global co-creators of the world in prosperity and innovation, it simply cannot happen with that type of economic freedom environment. So let us not lose sight of the big goal here. All of that being said, this is where Bitcoin comes into the picture as far as I'm concerned. Is it easy to try and do piecemeal legislation? Because to change this economic freedom environment that we talked about, a lot of it, as you can imagine, will have to come through reforms. And I think a lot of us in this room really don't have high expectations for governments. But now, stay with me here for a second. What I see for the continent, the reason why I remain so hopeful, almost to a point of craziness. Some people think I'm crazy for believing that in my lifetime, I'll see a prosperous Africa leading the rest of the world in innovation and prosperity building. But let me tell you what I see and how we get there. We are 54 countries, 55 depending on how you count. I don't need for all of those countries to change all at once. Absolutely not. All I need is in one country, someone to understand what it is that we're talking about, someone that understands that unless and until you free your value creators, AKA entrepreneurs, you're simply not going to get anywhere. And at the same time, you're also saying to me, but see what I have to deal with. My very few people, opposition party included, might, and in some cases people might say even France, and who knows which other countries that are meddling with us, are not going to let me do this. As a matter of fact, one president, I won't say who, said, this is a great idea, but the French won't let me. I say, fine. maybe you don't have the courage it takes to get this done. Let me go look somewhere else. And I found that someone else. There is this one person somewhere on the continent, it is not Paul Kagame, who is like, I see this. So what is this? This is, we cannot, for many reasons, change the laws so that it becomes easier for entrepreneurs to do business. But there is something we can do. Let's look at a rather unoccupied piece of land somewhere on this national land so that we are not being called expropriators or anything like that. This is a piece of land where no one wants to be. There's no one. There's no one. No one. Maybe a few crickets and something like that. There, we are going to work. I'm going to give you the freedom to go ahead and design when it comes to business. We're not talking about family law. We're not talking about anything that keeps a country sovereign. We're not talking about immigration laws. We're not talking about defense laws. None of that. We don't touch any of that. We're simply talking about business laws and the laws that basically rules the life of businesses and business people. There, go ahead. Design your set of laws and governance. So basically what this person is saying, in this determined zone, it gets to have its own law and governance, and it better be the best designed set of law and governance for business, for doing business. And so we got someone to agree to do that. And so right now we're busy designing all of that, and of course, you want all this economic activity that's going to be happening to be actually powered by Bitcoin. So the partners we're working with have been, I've been involved in some of these, projects. We call them the startup cities. The latest one that you might take a look at is one that's in Honduras, like I said, the island of Roatan, where basically there, part of the law, Bitcoin is legal tender. And we're going to be doing the same in this African nation as well. What I love about this is not about coming in and telling someone this is how you're going to do something. As a matter of fact, what I love about what we're about to do, what we are in the process of doing is you're basically building common law on top of, in this case, this traditional African nation. It's a really beautiful combination, and that's usually what common law allows us to do. And by the way, do you know that most of the Francophone African nations still run on civil law, which is one of the worst, most terrible type of law when it comes to business. And yet, we are still running with that. You want to talk about colonization? Right there in our laws, all over the place, is the big, fat imprints of the colonizer, in ways that definitely do not, support growth for us. So I would love to say civil law has to go. And by the way, do you know how far that dates from? We're talking about Napoleonic civil law. That's how back far it goes. And very few of our people know this, by the way. We think these are ours. They're not. And so, in any case, in this place, this country is setting out to reclaim its freedom, really. And so the plan here is, let's try this on this side. We don't impose it to any citizen. We build it, see if it works, and then the citizens basically get to try before they buy. But guess what? If this works, watch it being replicated all over the continent, each time a better iteration of itself. And we do know that whenever the right economic reforms are put together somewhere in a critical mass that makes sense, it takes no more than 25 years for the magic to happen. And so, if you ask me, how do I see us becoming the leading co-creators of prosperity and global innovation in the world? That's how it's going to happen. We don't have to be overwhelmed with the big problem in front of us. We just have to stay focused and know exactly what it is that we're looking for. So as we all, tap into this whole Bitcoin technology, I really, really want us to not forget what the end goal is. And that Bitcoin just happens to be the greatest financial tool for that.
Great. You said a lot there, and just as you were speaking, me just trying to visualize your vision. I kind of see like a track field, you know, and you mentioned in America, if you want to get an LLC, it takes you 20 minutes, but in Senegal, it takes you 2 hours, right? So
I wish it was 2 hours.
or more, right? So we're talking about the regulatory impediments. So if in America's lane is a straight lane for the 100-yard dash because it's open, free markets, and maybe in an African nation there's hurdles and maybe an oil slick, some Legos thrown in the lane, which doesn't stop the entrepreneur, but it really slows the progress and the development. So what you're envisioning with the startup cities is creating these economic zones, right, that are free market, open, and allows for entrepreneurs to build to their greatest potential, and using Bitcoin or whatever their expertise is to economically and empower the entire nation and community. Is that correct? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, you're on the right track. So basically, instead of being zoned for poverty, as most of the poor world is right now, we need to be zoned for prosperity. At the end of the day, it turns out that law, so many people take the law for what it is, and we think we can't do anything about it. And I would like to argue that law and governance is actually the last frontier of technology, and we don't have to take it for granted. So the way I look at what's going on in our countries is what we're trying to do is think about this piece of land I told you about, like that computer over there. That's just what it is, that computer, that hardware. And then think about the law and governance that gets to rule it as your software, the running the operating software. And and that's when we find out that most of the poor world is running on an operating software for poverty, which is these bad laws, these overregulation. And so all I'm saying is, let's change the operating software and then eventually watch the magic happen. And part of that operating software, you're going to have, it's going to say very specific things when it comes to labor law, say very specific things when it comes to tax law, all of that. And it's also going to say something very specific when it comes to banking and finance law. In a way, pretty much there, it's going to say Bitcoin is legal tender, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the relationship of Bitcoin in this big picture that I'm talking about,
right?
If that makes any sense.
Yes, absolutely.
And also in a zone like that, we also leapfrog education. Just like most Africans never got to know the landline, we switched directly to cell phones. Same thing with the banking situation. So many of us are unbanked and are probably going to be leapfrogging this whole concept of being traditionally banked. I would like, if we have so much, unschooled young people on the continent, I also would like to see them leapfrogging traditional education as we know it. Completely. Around the world, we're seeing that there is a real big problem with traditional education. And I don't care that you're going to Harvard or that you're going to some little school somewhere in the middle of Senegal. It seems like education has a big problem right now, and there too, we should leapfrog. And so this is another place where these digital careers, and including the crypto careers, are going to be important. And when you think about Bitcoin, I saw people on this panel here yesterday. Don't just think about the crypto career that involve coding. We're going to need all types of people. Talking about mining is going to have a lot of jobs also. Electrical engineers of sort, to kind of maintain these facilities. I mean, you need to think about it up and down, the stream. When it comes to. So these are the things that in zones like this, we're completely, because at this point, the time is no longer up for us to catch up. We gotta leapfrog. So we gotta leapfrog. And there's so much we know, when this is an advantage we have of, getting our development going, trying to put it on fast track. Let's just leapfrog on everything.
So people like you and me who work with officials and regulators, many Bitcoiners would say, why do we even need the help of government intervention to succeed, especially if we have a technology that's open, permissionless, censorship resistant? That should be enough in itself. I don't want to anger too many people here, but is that short-sighted in a way, or give a perspective of why to interact?
No, it is not short-sighted, because at the end of the day, the truth is that we normally don't need to wait for government, at least in the case of Bitcoin. But if any government wakes up one day and says that it's illegal to do to have Bitcoins or to deal with Bitcoin, you're in serious trouble. So, but you know, people in the tech world, you have more abilities to escape by bad laws and bad regulation. But for those of us who are in the brick and mortar businesses, I run a manufacturing plant in Senegal. So it's as brick and mortar as it gets. Well, guess what? I cannot escape these bad laws by just going and hiding in the cloud or relying on inexistent laws simply because when the central planners were coming down and putting all their stupid laws together, they never in a million years would have ever thought technology would get to where it is. So in a way, technology is ahead of bad regulations. Good for them. But you do not, software does not, you don't eat software last time I checked. You don't shower with software last time I checked. You don't, ingest software to, heal yourself last time I checked. So brick and mortar is here, and I would like to imagine that even if you're involved in great technology companies living somewhere in Nigeria or Ghana or whatever, I think that everybody in this room, at least I will say it for myself, but there's one thing that scares me anytime I go back home or I'm anywhere on African countries. What happens if I get into an accident? What happens if, God forbid, maybe I get a heart attack and I need to be, taken care of very well? There's a reason why all of our presidents, as soon as they're sick or really threatened, or anybody who has money, if they have a serious illness, they get airlifted and transported somewhere to the Western world. So really, I mean, at that point, you start to understand that the reason why some of this stuff is happening the way it is has to do with also everything that cripples doing business, brick and mortar businesses on the ground, where you're very much subject to the laws of the land. So laws originate from government, obviously. This is, so the best thing we can do is work in a way so we get to as flexible legislation as possible. So what we do in these three cities is try to not put too much in the law, but keep the law as general as possible, and then people can work the specifics at the contract level. And it makes it very much more not only flexible, but also you can go as precise as you want, but that happens between two parties, and they do it together. But you don't subject the rest of the community to these laws. So you don't make it law, you push it down to the contract level, if it makes any sense.
Yes.
And this is all rather complex, guys, so I can understand if this is the first time I maybe introduced this to some people. Yesterday when I asked who knew about startup cities, I think only 1 or 2 hands went up. So I get it, that it might be new, and at first some people hear and they're like, what are you talking about? So if you want to know more about this, you can easily follow me on social media, and also I'm here. Come talk to me. There is a lot of work to do for all types of people, definitely people in this room. So I apologize if it's a bit too complex, but hopefully you're getting the gist of it. I know this room is made of very smart people, so yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm going to ask probably one of my final 2 questions, but one of them is, what can the Bitcoin community do to support economic freedom? But really just to tag along of what you're saying of, for our work at BPI, we was talking earlier before, this conversation, about the bills that are supported, right? And not to get too in the weeds, but they had DCCPA, which is Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act, and it was supported let's say by a CEO whose exchange just fell recently. But because of that influence on Capitol Hill, that was getting sort of sped run through policy, right? You know, bills that there were better bills that were out for a year, but they didn't have the right connections. But this one that had the right backer had this sped through, and it was actually, you know, if that exchange didn't fall, you know, it was looked at to be passed in 2023, right? And one of the biggest sort of parts and components of that bill, when we're talking about like stifling innovation, was that the CFTC would have the regulatory authority to blacklist, to censor transactions that they deem to be illicit financial activity, right? So when we say, oh, would this stop Bitcoin? No, it would not technically stop Bitcoin or the blockchain. But when we talk about the on-ramps and the off-ramps, how people buy and sell Bitcoin, which is the exchanges that uses, you know, KYC, AML, that under the legal authority of the CFTC, they can deem, no, we don't like that transaction, let's block it. And that's over 95% of the people, probably more, who uses exchanges to transact on Bitcoin. So that, you know, as we were saying, to be at the table, to make sure that we keep the Bitcoin ethos and keep the Bitcoin principles to the people who have the pen and that can sign the paper. So I think that's really important for us, like moving forward. We have a couple of minutes left, but I guess, you know, for our final message, what can Bitcoiners do to help, you know, economic empowerment and freedom here?
I think Bitcoiners are doing exactly what they should be doing. I mean, you guys are working on getting the technology ever so greater. Like I said before, I absolutely, when the Lightning Network came up, that's when I was just like, okay, I think we're out of the woods now. Now, are we going to be completely out of the woods within the next 7 years or within the next 25 years? I think a lot of that might depend on actually our ability and our intelligence in terms of dealing with a regulatory framework in various places around the world. So I think you guys are doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and I cannot encourage you more on this path, where you can support with this greater goal that I talked about earlier for Africans to become respected global co-creators of innovation and prosperity in the world is really, you know, do not, it was a little bit shocking to me, but it's also full of hope for me that, you know, many of you did not know about the Startup Cities movement. So while it was a little bit shocking to me, I'm super excited because we don't expect people to work with things that they don't know about. But I would like to think that now many more of you know about this movement that's out there, and this is definitely part of a global movement of freedom fighters in a way. And so my plea to you today is please find out more about the Startup Cities movement. Come join us. We're creating environment and places where where it is legal and encouraged for you to do your craft. So just educate yourself on Startup Cities. Join us, support us as well, and hopefully come play with us in these special economic zones that we're creating around the world. That's my message to you. But other than, in general though, you are the community that gives me the most hope in general. So just find out more about the Startup Cities movement, and let's see if we can join forces some more.
Sounds great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.